The argument I want to make to you today is that financial collapse do not happen accidentally or naturally. It has to be engineered. You have too much money in the system, then people do stupid things like gamble, okay? And the last problem in America is you can't win wars. Like this Iran situation is showing that the American military is not as strong as you think it is. This is all being engineered. There are people behind the scenes who have the power to cause economies to rise and to fall. The big question is, why did the financial market collapse? This is just a law of gravity. If you go too high, you're gonna fall. But what people don't tell you is this. There are actually people who made a lot of money because of the collapse. John Paulson. How much money did he make in this collapse? $20 billion, guys.
Most people think financial crashes are accidents. The economy overheats, people get greedy, and then gravity pulls it down. That is what your textbook says. That is what the news says. And for a long time, that is what most of us believed. But what if the collapses are not accidents? What if they are decisions? That is the argument Professor Jiang is making. And he is not making it from conspiracy forums or fringe economics. He is making it by tracing the actual architecture of the global financial system, how it was built, who controls it, and why it is designed to boom and bust on cue. Jiang teaches history and philosophy. His framework is not mainstream, and he says that all the time. But the patterns he points to are real. The data is real. And what he is describing about where the global economy is heading right now deserves a serious look.
I want to look at how the global economy will collapse. Specifically, how the US economy will collapse because of this war. Now, the argument I want to make to you today is that financial collapse do not happen accidentally or naturally. It has to be engineered. And this is a very hard concept for us to understand, okay? So in economics, there's something called the boom-bust cycle, which basically states that in capitalism, you have the economy booming, then suddenly, for whatever reason, it collapses, okay? It's called a boom-bust cycle. And the idea is that if you study economics, they teach you that this is just a natural part of capitalism because in good times, people spend too much money. They become overconfident. And so then they waste a lot of money and then it collapses. The economy turns bad. And so you have to focus on being more lean and efficient and resilient. So think of, gaining weight, okay? You gain too much weight and then you feel bad, so then you lose weight. And that's the idea of the boom-bust cycle. The problem, though, is that no one can explain properly how and why suddenly the bubble pops, okay? What is the mechanism or trigger for the collapse? If you study economics, you will never ever know the answer. So we are going to focus on speculation today, okay? So again, the internet knows this, but I've never studied economics. I don't know much about economics, but I'm curious as to why this happens, okay? Why is it that bubbles pop? How do economies rise and fall, okay? So let's look at, very quickly, the main explanation for why booms and busts happens. And this is from Andrew Ross Sorkin, who is probably the most influential financial journalist in America. And he wrote a book called 1929, which looks at the stock market collapse of 1929, and he offers a very good explanation as to why it happened. Okay, so Amber, could you read from me, please?
Of course. Lengthy, uninterrupted booms like the one in the 1920s produce a collective delusion. Optimism becomes a drug or a religion or some combination of both. People lose their ability to calculate risk and distinguish between good ideas and bad ones.
Okay, so again, this is a set explanation for why there's a bubble burst, because it's delusional, and then it's like you fly too high, okay? But you're not supposed to fly, so then you fall down to the ground eventually. It's just gravity, okay? The idea of gravity. But what I want to show you today is there's actually another explanation, which is this is all being engineered. There are people behind the scenes who have the power to cause economies to rise and to fall, okay? So let me give you an example of this. All right, let's just say you're a bank. All right, you're a bank. And your job is to take those money, save it, and then use it properly in order to promote the economy, okay? So let's just say we put $1 million into the bank, okay? And what does the bank do with it? The bank then lends it out to entrepreneurs, right? So maybe I want to start a restaurant, and so I borrow $1 million from the bank, okay? Question, how much money is in the bank now? It's a zero, right? Okay, that's just math, guys. Look, if I take in $1 million and I lend it out $1 million, I should have zero, because that's just basic math. But that's not the answer. The actual answer is $2 million. And what you need to understand is that each bank has the ability to print its own money. And the bank is a mechanism for liquidity in the economy, okay? And this is a great illusion. This is the delusion, okay? Behind the economy, where money is just an idea, it's a concept, it's a collective hallucination.
So let's start with the foundation. Jiang's first argument is about something called the boom-bust cycle. Economics textbooks describe it as a natural rhythm of capitalism. Confidence rises, people overspend, the bubble pops, and the economy corrects. Clean, logical, nobody's fault. But Jiang asks a question that most economists never really answer. What actually triggers the collapse? Not the conditions that build up to it, the specific moment it breaks. Because if you study economics carefully, you will notice the textbooks never give you a clean answer to that. And Jiang says that silence is not an accident.
So this is one big Ponzi scheme. But we know for a fact that in 2008, this system collapsed. And for the longest time, what we believed is it's because the defaults were too many. They were too much. And so the system had to collapse. But if you look at what happened, what you will discover is that's not true, okay? The banks could just choose to roll over the default, okay? Meaning, okay, you owe me $1,000, right? For the mortgage, but you can't pay me. What do? Well, I say, pay me back next month, right? You're like, next month you can't pay me back? Don't worry, pay me back the month after, okay? I can have the system keep on going. Because remember, this system, this money is just based on an illusion. Doesn't make sense, guys. But it collapsed, okay? So that's something that we're gonna look at today. All right, so as you can see from this map, this chart, at first what was happening was that the government was the one issuing out loans, okay? So the government is basically light blue. But then because this industry was so profitable, private banks started to come in and issue their own loans. And these became very risky loans, okay? And this led, of course, to 2008 when the entire thing collapsed. Okay, all right. So the big question is, why did the financial market collapse? So this is the CDO issuance, okay? As you can see, it's generating a lot of money for these private banks. And then suddenly in 2008, there's this massive default, it collapses. The question is, why did this happen? And again, you're taught in economics class, this is just a law of gravity, okay? If you go too high, you're gonna fall. But what people don't tell you is this. There are actually people who made a lot of money because of the collapse. John Paulson. How much money did he make in this collapse? $20 billion, guys. That's a lot of money. $20 billion. How did he make his money? He made his money by betting that the house market would collapse. You understand what happened? Okay? So think about this. Okay, I lend $1 million to Amber, okay? And every month you have to pay back $10,000. But then suddenly you can't pay me back, right? But if I tell you, Amber, you can't pay me back, you have to give me your home, okay? Then I lose my investment in you, right? So I don't do that. I keep on letting you live in the house, pretend that you can pay me back even though you can't pay me back. But then Vincent says to me, hey, Mr. Jiang, I bet you that Amber will not default on her loan because she hasn't defaulted in the past 10 years. I say to Vincent, how much do you want to bet me? And he's like, $500,000. Okay, he's so confident that you will not default, right? So I say, sure, Vincent, I'll take this bet with you, right? Now what I do? Now I make you default because now I can make $1 million from Vincent. And that's how it worked, guys. You think it's a very complicated thing. It's not. It's all a giant scam because only a few people control the entire system. This is how you make $20 billion in this game, okay? There's stupid people buying mortgages from you, right? But you have even more stupid people who bet that you will not default on these mortgages. And so you take your money from the stupidest people. And that's why the system collapsed. Because you're gonna make more money from collapsing the system than just letting it go on. Before 2008, most homes were actually owned by individuals, okay? This is 2008, okay?
This is the part that most people find hardest to accept, not because the evidence is weak, but because the implication is uncomfortable. John Paulson made $20 billion betting that the housing market would collapse, not predicting it from the outside, betting on it. And if you understand how that bet works, you quickly realize the bet itself is part of the mechanism. You do not just predict the collapse, you help cause it. That is not a conspiracy theory, but a documented trade.
Another idea I want you to understand is that after the 2008 Great Financial Crisis, this created problems in the global economy. And so what happened was transnational capital decided to save the global economy by allowing China to rise. Okay? So this is not known, but one major consequence of the Great Financial Crisis is that transnational capital encouraged China to print money. So after 2008, the Bank of International Settlements had a problem in that the global economy was slowing down. Europe had lost a lot of money, America had lost a lot of money. So their solution was, let's shift the center of gravity from America and Europe to China. And you're like, okay, how do you do that then? You do that with something called the exchange rate. Okay, exchange rate is very simple. Renminbi to USD. Okay? So remember how the interest rate in a national economy, it's a signaling mechanism as to whether or not to increase or decrease liquidity. Well, the exchange rate in the international marketplace is a signaling mechanism to tell other nations whether or not to trade with another nation. Okay, does that make sense to you guys? All right, so let's look at what happened. So for the longest time, the Chinese currency was trading above 8 to the US dollar. Because remember, the US dollar is the main mechanism, of global trade. And then, hey, starting around this time, 2008, guys, it started to increase in value. Okay? And so now the world knows, oh, I should trade with China. And China is like, well, okay, my exchange rate is higher than before, therefore I should buy more things from the world. Okay? But not only that, but now that I have access to commodities from the world, then I should know I need to promote my economy to use these resources. So I should spend more money on infrastructure. I should build more high-speed railways. I should build airports. Okay? And that's what China did. You see how 2008, just as the American and European economies were suffering, the global economy was suffering, the Chinese economy, China started to have a higher exchange rate, okay? And it kept on going higher and higher. And then what did China do with it? China started to buy stuff from around the world with it. Okay? Again, this is a signaling mechanism where the Bank of International Settlements is saying to the world, you can now sell to China. We will guarantee China. All right? And that's because the Bank of International Settlements needed China to buy more things from the world. And this happened starting around 2008, right? This massive surge in imports. And because all the commodities were coming to China to spend these commodities, so it started to build infrastructure, right? And how did it finance the building of this infrastructure? Bank loans, guys. Bank loans. All right? So this is China. Sorry. This is China, right? Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. This is China. 2008. 2008, basically, China, US, Japan, Europe, their economies were about the same. The bank systems were about the same. But starting about 2008, wow. Look at this. You have too much money in the system, then people do stupid things like gamble, okay? All right? And the last problem with America is you can't win wars. Okay? Like this Iran situation is showing that the American military is not as strong as you think it is. So if you trust international capital, you see these three things, okay? The population is getting too old. There's too much money around, so people do stupid things like gambling. And the American military is not that great. Then you're going to shift your capital from America overseas, okay? But before you do that, what you want to do is engineer a financial crisis so that you can make as much money as possible, just like the 2008 financial crisis, okay? So we don't know when it will happen, but we can be sure that it will happen. It'll be suddenly, okay?
Here is where Jiang's analysis lands, and this is the part worth sitting with. After 2008, the transnational capital did not retreat. It was reorganized. It shifted the center of gravity toward China, used the Bank of International Settlements as the coordinating mechanism, engineered a stronger renminbi, and flooded China with the liquidity the global economy needed. That worked for about 15 years, and then it stopped working because China never wanted to carry the military and reserve currency burden that comes with being the world's economic anchor. So now, according to Jiang, the next shift is being set up, and the destination he points to is Israel. Wars are profitable, reconstruction is profitable, trade route control is profitable, and the Middle East conflict is, in his reading, not a crisis disrupting the financial order. It is an opportunity being used to redirect it. You do not have to agree with everything Jiang says. Some of it is speculative, and he says so himself. But the structure he is describing, the BIS, the Federal Reserve origins, the 2008 mechanics, and the China pivot, those are all documented. The question is not whether the system is managed. The question is by whom and where it is being managed toward next. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in our next video.